Welcome, everyone. I'm Shuja Nawaz, Distinguished Fellow at the South Asia Center of the Atlantic Council. And on behalf of the Director, Irfan Nuruddin, and the South Asia Center team, I want to welcome you to what promises to be an exciting 1 hour of discussion that will answer the question, what is the key to national prosperity? And for this purpose, we are delighted to have with us Raza Hasan, who is not just an entrepreneur, but someone with a global vision and someone who has not only done extremely well in business, but it now wishes to take his ideas on how to improve governance and to make a people-centric government the rule rather than the exception around the world. I'm delighted that we have this global reach of expertise in the room with us, the virtual room. Before I introduce Raza and ask him to open up the discussion, I thought I would just request the participants as we go down the list to say 1 or 2 sentences about themselves so that everybody else knows where they're coming from. So just a couple of sentences, please, because we want to get quickly into the nub of the discussion. So let me start with Dr. Murad Ali.
Yes, thank you. I'm Murad Ali. I'm working as assistant professor at the University of Malakand at the Department of Political Science. I had my PhD from Mass University, New Zealand in 2012, and my postdoc from Germany in 2016. And my area is political economy of foreign aid and development effectiveness.
Thank you for sharing that. That's important for us to know, so we know where you're coming from. Dr. Akdas Afzal.
My name is Dr. Akdas Afzal. I'm a faculty member. I teach economics at Habib University in Karachi. And previously, I finished my PhD on a Fulbright scholarship from the University of Missouri in Kansas City. I also have a master's in political science. And I knew Irfan Nuruddin back when he was a young faculty member at Ohio State. Thank you.
Excellent. I think we're still waiting for Huma Bakai to join us, so I'll move on. If Nawaz Dari is with us, I'll see. If not, then Dr. Mujtaba Ihsani.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mujtaba Ihsani, currently a research associate at the University of Mannheim. I was previously a colleague to Akdas at Habib University. I was working as an assistant professor. I originate from rural Sindh and interested in rural political economy of Sindh and of course, development work in Pakistan in general. And Irfan was my previous advisor as well, so.
Thank you. I've come to learn that Irfan has a wide reach. Dr. Yasser Qureshi.
Hello, I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at Trinity College at the University of Oxford. My work primarily looks at judicial and constitutional politics, primarily in Pakistan. And that's my area. And I'm originally from Karachi, but I'm here right now and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. I think Mr. Khalid Lodi has not been too well recently, so he may or may not join us. Let me move on to Amina Syed.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Amina Syed, and I'm the managing director of a new startup publishing company called Lightstone Publishers. Previously, I was managing director of Oxford University Press, Pakistan, for 30 years. And I started the Karachi Literature Festival in Karachi. I had many of those, and then now I do the other festival.
Thank you, Amina. And in the interest of truth and advertising, just so you know that Irfan isn't the only one with great contacts. Amina was my first publisher for my book, Cross Swords, and that is still going strong.
I'm proud to have been your publisher.
It's mutual.
And also your wonderful book of poetry.
Yes, of course. I forget that. Kamal Siddiqui, please. Okay, Kamal hasn't been able to join us. Hello, Irfan. I'm glad you joined us. You want to say a few words, please?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much, Shuja. Thank you, Raza, for sharing your insights and your book with this group. And so lovely to see Muj and Akdas after so many years as well. So my name is Irfan. I'm the director of the South Asia Center. I'm also a professor in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. But as you probably surmise, I was previously a professor at Ohio State, where I had the pleasure of knowing Muj and Akdas when they were just as smart, but less distinguished and less prosperous looking at these factors. The South Asia Center has been working very closely with Shuja, who was our founding director and now distinguished fellow, to really do a different kind of work on Pakistan than is often done in the context of Washington, D.C. think tanks, less focus on some of the age-old security issues, many of which, of course, are in the news right now with Afghanistan, but really focused on the economy as a primary driver of the positive change we hope and we know is occurring in Pakistan. So we put out a very important, what we think is a very important report on the Pakistan economy a couple of weeks ago. We've done a couple of roundtables that Shuja facilitated on the water situation in Pakistan. And today's conversation is in that vein of focusing on how can we really drive prosperity. So the idea of this very small group conversation is to move away from very big public conversations where everyone talks, but really to have an honest conversation with each other about what are the challenges. And we're focused in that regard. And I'm grateful to each of you to get people who can give a granularity to this, right? What does it actually look like on the ground? Where are the green shoots that we can build on? Where are the real problems that we need to be aware of, et cetera? So with that, I'll leave you in Shuja's able hands. And Raza, looking forward to learning from your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfan. And now let me quickly introduce Raza Hasan, who is the author of Prosperity for All Nations, A Call for Action, a book that you can see over my shoulder. He is also, as I said at the beginning, an entrepreneur who has done extremely well in the business world. He founded in 2006 a company called TimeSolve, which is probably now one of the leading companies in the business of legal time reporting. But he has a very fascinating background. And before I have him talk about his ideas, let me just give you a very quick overview of Raza. He has a bachelor's in science and aerospace engineering and an ME in electrical engineering from Iowa State University. He has an MBA in marketing and strategic management at the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. And he has also presented at the Global Airline Group of International Federation of Operational Research Societies meetings in London, Kuala Lumpur, and Hong Kong. He's also been very active in Minnesota politics and has was one of the 2 delegates to meet US Congress members in Washington, D.C. for the nonpartisan Fix the Debt movement. He also served a 3-year term on the Economic Development Commission for the city of Eagan in Minnesota, and has been an adjunct professor for quantitative decision-making for the MBA program at Augsburg University and for strategic management and quantitative decision-making at the National American University. So a remarkably wide range of experience and expertise, but somebody who is determined to share his ideas for improving the world and for forming coalitions across the globe. And I don't think a better opportunity than this, where we have people from around the world, but people who are rooted in Pakistan, which is obviously a focus of our attention. So Raza, if I could ask you to please speak briefly about your ideas and where you want them to head, and then we will open it up for a conversation. Raza Hasan.
Thank you, Shuja, and thanks everyone for the presence of all of you esteemed participants today. I am delighted that I have this opportunity. In the interest of time, I guess I'm going to just share a brief analysis of my book, and again, the name of the book is Prosperity for All Nations. So we'll focus on what causes poverty and how prosperity for a nation can be achieved. I've spent about 6-7 years researching this topic, and then at the end, I have put this book together. At the end, I guess, again, at the end of this conversation, I'd like to learn from you and understand how we can move this message forward. So I think let me just give you the summary of the book. Just from the overall view, a lot of things I'm going to say, again, all of you are highly qualified folks. A lot of things may sound redundant, but just to be on record, I'll share those. So the simple thing I was struggling with is, when a child is born, we are all equal. So what is the reason for poverty for some nations and prosperity for others? So after my analysis, the secret of national prosperity is that, and I'll quote Professor Brian Stevens, who says, the opposite of poverty is not wealth. Again, the opposite of poverty is not wealth, it is justice. So injustice manifests as corruption. So I'm specifically focused on the abuse of official power. So I think just, to summarize, the fundamental requirement for prosperity is accountability and justice. Even in the US, some people have this misconception that it's based on freedom. It's not based on freedom. It's the freedom to do the right thing. If you do the wrong thing, you'll get punished. Now, what causes injustice? Injustice and corruption occur due to concentration of power, enabling the powerful to violate the law and get away with it. As I guess a famous person, John Acton, had said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So corruption cannot take place without having the power to do it. So what does it take, to reduce corruption and concentration of power that causes it? I mean, that's the part I think is the big question. So what I've done is I've looked at US and some other prosperous nations, and my analysis is a distributed governance structure, such as what is used in the US, with collective decision-making, is the proven solution to fight concentration of power. A structure where no single official can harm an individual, thus all governing authorities should have checks imposed by the collective decision-making of locally elected representatives. And I'll get into more details and explain these in this opening interlude, which may take about 8 to 10 minutes. So just to talk about justice, 3 government entities directly administer justice to a nation. Number 1 is the police to catch the criminals. The number 2 is the judiciary to decide the punishment for the wrongdoers. And third is how the money is allocated through taxes, because money is power, and for a just society, it must be distributed equitably. Now I'm going to compare Pakistan as a third world country with the United States. So a lot of you, again, or actually most of you have some background from Pakistan, or some of you are there. If a police officer in Pakistan arrests somebody violating a rule, the most likely transaction is a bribe, because if he actually arrests or punishes somebody, they get calls from powerful officials and politicians to let the perpetrator go. If the police officer tries to enforce the law, they may get punished and be transferred to a remote location as a punishment from that influential power. And people are going to always talk about who they know and things like that when a police officer catches somebody. So what happens is that the law enforcement is not rewarded. Okay, there is nothing that benefits a police officer for enforcing the law. Instead, the police officer benefits by pleasing their superiors, by sharing the collected bribes, and thus are forced to engage in corruption. So that's what kind of determines and drives just the police's behavior, okay? Because they do not have any independent powers to enforce the law, because they are part of a vertically integrated kleptocracy, which has roots all the way or is driven all the way to the top. On the other hand, in the US, and for those who are not familiar, I would highly recommend these things are, worth studying. Seems like you're all scholars in this particular area. Why, the US has been successful is that large metro areas are divided into small cities. Each of the local city council, and this is true in other countries, in Europe also. I think UK is governed in similar fashion. So each of the local city councils independently administer the policing and other government services. For example, where I live is the Metroplex of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and it has about a population of 3 million. It is divided up into 218 small cities, or officially they're called registered municipalities, which is kind of an official designation for a city which has their own government. And to use a more specific example, I live in Eagan, Minnesota, and it is a city of about 66,000 people right now. The police serving residents of Eagan are held accountable by the local people. Okay, the question is how? By voting to elect the mayor and the city council members who are responsible for selecting the police chief. All right. Even the mayor of the small city does not have autocratic powers. It is a part-time position that I know that individual. He has a regular job, but he does this for minimal pay to serve the community. So even him as the mayor does not have autocratic powers. He is held accountable not only by the voters, but by 4 city council members. So each city council member is representing a fourth of the citizenry of Eagan. So any decisions that have to be made, all these 5 people have to vote in majority for that 66,000 people population. And I guess just to make an observation, similar structural weaknesses permeate the judiciary in the US versus Pakistan. All right, so just a few other things to talk about, the US system. As part of the distributed structure, both the federal and state governments operate court systems. So I'm going to focus now on the judiciary in the US and in Pakistan. The state courts handle the majority of cases concerning individuals. Federal courts only decide specific cases as the constitutionality of a law or matters that may span across many or multiple states. So an individual does not have to deal with them in general. So in all states except 7, 7 small states, judges are elected directly by the people that they serve. All right, and even in the 7 states where judges are not elected, they're elected by the state representatives. The other part is, even if there is an elected judge, they do not have autocratic powers. The majority of the trials are decided by jury, which is representing a cross section of the community. So this is where, again, that distributed decision-making powers are enforced. The court structure varies by state, and again, even in the population of Minnesota of 5.6 million, there are 87 counties, and each of these court systems operate at the county level. All judges are elected for a 6-year term, and as I said, by the people that they serve. And then, this is how the local population can hold these judges accountable. I mean, they have to be qualified to be a judge, but even to become a judge, you need to be elected. Again, this concept of elected judges in third world countries, especially Pakistan, is completely absent, right? The other thing now I'm going to talk about is the collection and distribution of taxes. In the US, taxes are collected locally by the city, county, or the state to serve the local population. Federal taxes are only funds for healthcare, for Social Security, and again, healthcare for seniors and welfare participants. Social Security, defense, other welfare programs and interest on debts on debt in that order. So again, the taxes are collected for the purposes where they're going to be utilized. In third world countries, either the central government collects the majority of the taxes or they control how the taxes are distributed. That is why if you see Lahore or some other cities, they have tree-lined boulevards and flyovers and beautiful lights. But outside the city, the poor people living in villages lack access to water, electricity, and roads. The governance structure and checks with localized collective decision-making are implemented every level in the US and other countries. I'm just using the US as an example. Even in the schools, we have school boards, which are elected members who are just volunteers. There is no pay for the school boards. Even or the parks, they have park boards to manage parks within a city. Now at the federal level, the US Constitution establishes 3 separate but co-equal branches of government. So this is another different thing. There are 3 branches, but they're all co-equal. The legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. This distributor structure again prevents one branch of the federal government from becoming too powerful and creates checks and balances on the other branches. So the bottom line is, unless structural changes are enforced, justice cannot prevail and corruption will continue. With injustice and corruption, prosperity would never materialize. The secret of prosperous countries is checks and balances, enforced a distributed structure subservient to the local population. I think that's the most important. Smaller group of people is controlling and holding accountable the services they are receiving. US has done similar or helped Germany, Japan, and South Korea through the Marshall Plan and helped these countries. And all these countries have done tremendously well. One thing which is coincidentally notable is that between Germany, Japan, and the US, the language, the culture, the religion, the race, and even the continents are different. So none of these factors matter. Somehow people have this notion that maybe it's got something to do with religion or the weather or the geography. No, it's all dependent upon accountability via localized structural checks and balances. So I think what we need to do is stop blaming the people or the leaders. They're playing by the prevailing rules. When you have a vertically integrated kleptocracy, you do not have the freedom to act in a just fashion. So just another example is, if you look at a cricket ground, I guess there are some test matches going on in the UK right now, or a soccer field, a person's skin color becomes immaterial. Everybody plays those games in identical fashion because the rules are identical. So bottom line is, folks, we have to figure out how we can change the rules of this game, and we have to adopt localized checks and balances, holding government employees accountable to serve the population. And just to give you now some background, okay, why did this happen? I mean, were we stupid, or how did this start? So the thing is, in the past, the governments represented dictators and colonizers. The goal for these people was to control the population and extract the wealth. So the colonizers left India, Pakistan, and many other countries that were colonies. But unfortunately, their system prevails. New officials moved into their luxurious estates and continue to govern and extract wealth in the same fashion. Even after getting liberated from the British, officials in most liberated counties still transfer their wealth to the West. I mean, we know all the corruption issues with some of the government officials and or prior leaders. The power of the government structure is so dominant that even when the players change, the outcome is going to remain the same. So I would like to share, this is just to conclude, that I have a dream to make this known across the globe, that we need to transform governments to be held accountable, such that we have government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Again, thank you folks for listening to my long commentary here. Appreciate your patience. But now I think I'll just open up the floor for how we can make this happen.
Thank you, Raza. I'm grateful for that overview and some of the details. I would like to suggest that we begin with some questions and comments. And first with, maybe I can go to Amina. I know that you've been thinking about some of these issues, Amina, as a very successful entrepreneur yourself. So maybe I could ask you to pose one or two questions, and then while Raza is responding to those, I would request others who also wish to join that answer or discussion to please raise your hand so that we can identify you, and that way we can call on you to ask your question or add your comment. So Amina, please.
Thank you, Sridhar. Raza, actually, I'd like to begin with my question on education. As you know that after 74 years, the state of education of government schools is dismal. And first of all, every child who is of school-going age is not going to schools. Over 20 million children are out of school. And those who are going to schools, particularly government schools, are not learning. And that results in a dropout rate because parents feel that they're just wasting their time. And I think, again, the reason is that, I mean, if just looking at sin, there are about over 160,000 state schools in Sindh, and they all run from Karachi. The education department in Karachi is managing all these schools, which leads to, again, very little accountability. And you've heard the stories about these schools being used as by the local landlords as their storeroom, and teachers are not coming. Other people are signing for them, and this happens because the local community is not involved. So I'll be grateful if you could talk about this issue and how we can improve the standard of public school education in Pakistan through changing the structure.
Great question. And again, I have a lot of information on these topics in my book, and I would really request, if you folks can review it, and I guess you'll have a deeper understanding of my perspective. So the thing with education, as you said, we have spent 74 years, in this country of Pakistan to do something about it. But since I've been born, I've been hearing the same thing. And my father actually started sort of a quest, and he was part of this Sir Syed University in Islamabad. He thought, somehow if the education can be improved, the situation in Pakistan will improve. But my analysis shows, and I've looked at, pretty much all the countries across the globe, education by itself is not an answer. It is not the root cause. And a few examples I'll share with you. Many, or I should say the best institutions in Pakistan and the cream of Pakistan typically does not stay in Pakistan. Aga Khan is one of these institutions where their medical program is recognized across the globe, and especially in the US. 90% of their graduates come to the US. Okay, so we educate these people. I'm not saying we stop educating, but we educate these people. We spend a lot of money. I mean, raising a child and educating a person is a very costly endeavor for, as a nation. But then these people are gifted to the US, all right? So the other thing I'll share with you, I have, again, I have stats in my book that there are some countries that have better, education level than the US. Sri Lanka's literacy rate is, 99%. I think there are a bunch of other Eastern European countries where they have very high educational standards. However, education itself does not create opportunities. Even though we think it does, it may help somebody. But if you go to a lot of, in Pakistan, if you take Uber, I've done that many times, and ask the drivers, well, some of them are fairly educated, but they don't have any jobs. So having an education is a consequence of a system that allocates resources effectively. If you don't allocate the resources effectively and you don't have opportunities, you can educate people, and then the smart people are going to leave the country and the contribution to the country is minimal. So that's what I would say. I mean, I agree education helps, but it is the consequence of the governance and the structure, not the root cause of it.
Thank you, Raza. I see Mujtaba Isani has raised his hand, and then after that, we'll go to Murad Ali. Mujtaba, of course, is in education and also in Sindh. So let's hear from him.
Yes, generally on that comment, and especially during like my fieldwork in Sindh, also experience in Sindh. So when, for example, in Sindh, one of the things that came up when there was this local government elections under Musharraf and under him, and where the Nazims were given power, one of the complaints was that these local government officials that were politicians never came to office or came to office quite late. There was a big bureaucratic backlog, and sort of this elected local official system in rural Sindh actually did not work. And then they were forced to sort of shift back to this sort of deputy commissioner system where these bureaucrats at least came to office and the day-to-day things were sort of being carried out. So I just wanted to ask you, like, do you think in a place like Pakistan where there is some of this sort of strong patron-client relations in especially the rural areas, and also maybe like probably not a perfect sort of democracy that we have. So do you think still your sort of this local elected officials can be this can be the answer to this broader question of prosperity in Pakistan?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mujtaba, for that question. The thing is that the structure that I'm sharing with you, again, I said, the three components: the policing, the judiciary, and the distribution of money. We have to have all three of them. We cannot just have one of them. So let's say, I'll just give you an example. Again, the city of Egan, and you can Google this. I somehow came across this. I did not know this. The mayor of Egan, I know him personally, but if you Google city of Egan mayor and arrested by the police, so he was drunk one day, and then the same police that reports to him arrested him, because these people have accountability, and even if the mayor wants, they know that the mayor cannot fire them, okay, because there are 5 other people. So we cannot have just one part of, it's like, a stool requires at least 3 legs. You need all these 3 legs to be there, so that if, for instance, if somebody is not acting according to the rules of the Constitution, is not showing up for work, number one, there should be a council. So one individual does not have the authority to not show up and nothing happens. Secondly, the police and the judiciary to enforce the regulations. So unless we understand we need all these 3 components, just having one part of it is not going to work.
Thank you. I thought I saw Murad raise his hand. Let me just suggest for the rest of you, if you wish to ask a question or add a comment, use the reaction button at the bottom of your screen and use the raise hand function, because it allows me to see much more clearly. So like Akdas has done. So let's go to Murad, and then after that, we'll go to Akdas. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think what you have mentioned in your book has been typically the case in Pakistan and in many countries. For example, in my area, political economy of foreign aid and development effectiveness. So literature says again that if aid is given to countries where it's democracy, respect for human rights, accountable institutions, and good governance, so $10 billion a year can reduce poverty or can uplift 25 million people out of poverty. But if the same amount of $10 billion is given to a country or to countries where there is lack of good governance, lack of accountability, lack of transparency, so it can take about 5 million people out of poverty. So I mean, it's 4 times effective if foreign aid is given to countries where there is justice, accountable institution, transparency. But again, and some, lots of other studies on this, that and in the context of Pakistan, for example, if I quote another book, when the 2030 agenda was being approved at the global stage, so there was consultation across the country, and the UN Development Group, UNDG, it came up with a report, 1 million voices, what we want for the future. So the world we want. So Pakistani participant in this particular survey, for them, the first issue was security and law and order. And because this survey was conducted in 2013, so we understand that law and order was a critical challenge, a very important issue. But the second most important issue that Pakistani participants highlighted was that we need good governance, transparent and accountable institution in rule of law. But what you mentioned again, I mean, how we can disempower those particular people who have the authority to legislate, who have authority to allocate money, who have authority to bring reforms. So it's not just empowering people, but also disempowering those who have all this authority or this elite capture. So how we can do it in Pakistan?
All right, so the question is, how can we do this in Pakistan? Again, this is kind of the toughest question, but I think my take is what I'm sharing with you folks, and I have discussed this with many people, and unfortunately, it's not what I consider a well-known fact, okay, that without a structure, you cannot enforce accountability. You cannot write in a book that you need to be accountable, okay, that does not happen. So the structure has to change. And a little bit background, the reason I came to this conclusion is in one of my MBA classes, we were studying how to design an organization for different types of outcomes. Okay, there is a military structure which is vertically driven, and then there are sort of creative structures which are more horizontal and localized so that people have more freedom. So in that study, I said, if that applies there, then I think the structure has an importance in the governance also. So I think, how can we make this happen in Pakistan? The first thing is we have to let people understand that you don't need to all try to run to the US. We can try to create the US type of structure. That's what's driving their success. There is nothing, very special about these other countries. So I think if the people have the awareness, and then some of the politicians, yes, right now, money and power are the same. In corrupt societies, if you have money, you have power. And if you have power, you will have money, because there is no accountability, there is no justice. I mean, money buys power, and power lets you get away with stuff. So we have to help some of the leaders. Okay, again, I have great respect for Imran Khan as the PM, and again, very hopeful that, he was not one of those, classes of really rich people, and people voted and elected and supported, and I did the same thing. So I think my take is we need a leader who understands these concepts and goes to the public and says, this is what we want to accomplish. I believe he or she will get that support. All right. And if they get the support, and this becomes like a topic of local and national conversations, people will understand it. Right now, our people, I think, are lost. Some people think, oh, we need more religion. We need, maybe the Taliban are going to fix this corruption. And they're kind of lost, okay? And there is no clarity on what corruption or what would it take to reduce corruption. I mean, we all were very excited about Imran Khan. He's been there for 3 years. And again, I'm still more hopeful than any time in the past. But unfortunately, yeah, you're shaking your head. But unfortunately, unless you change the structure by changing one person at any level, even at the top, does not change the country. We have to embrace this change. And I think, just imagine that people start protesting that, okay, we need a reform in how the judges are, nominated right now. I mean, they should be elected by the local people. Yes, it will take other, time and, a little bit of iterations to eliminate the bad elements. But I think that's where we need this education, and we need something in the media, and that will be the first thing. And then the second thing is we need support even from outside of people that are trying to make a difference in Pakistan, even the US aid and other elements that at least we believe or hope that they can aid these countries, that we ask them, this is what we need.
Thank you, Raza. I think that you're also hinting at a more active and powerful role from the diaspora. But let me move on to Akdas. His hand has been raised, and then after him, Yasser. Akdas, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Raza Hasan Saab, for a very nice presentation. I think you've presented a significant amount of food for thought. A lot of people have been thinking about these very important questions for a very long time. I just wanted to say that I completely agree with your analysis when you talk about the absence of local democracy in the case of Pakistan. So you gave this example of the mayor being able to hold the police chief accountable. I mean, that is something that is completely missing in Pakistan. Really, I was participating in a webinar and I posed this question to Mr. Sartaj Aziz just yesterday. And he also picked up on this point, and he said, yes, the absence of local government is a very, very big problem because what ideally should have happened at the time of partition/independence is that both countries, India and Pakistan, but we'll speak about Pakistan here, should have gone through a process of what I call de-Rajification. So they should have done away with the CSP, they should have done away with the centrally controlled police service, what have you, and try to devolve power. But as we know, that did not take place for various reasons. So I completely agree with your analysis that lack of local democracy, lack of third tier of democracy is a very significant reason why we see the state of affairs we see in the case of Pakistan. Now, when you talk about institutions that bring about checks and balances in the case of US, so you talk about the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, I think Pakistan is no different when it comes to having its own, three separate institutions. Now, the jury is still out on how effectively these institutions have been able to provide checks and balances on each other or themselves, because there is a very big, significant veto player in the system besides these three institutions. And I think that also needs to be brought into the analysis of, at least in the case of Pakistan. But in terms of the institutions that are present in Pakistan, I think we have these institutions. US is an exception when it comes to the direct or popular election of judges. I think very few countries in the world have direct and popular elections of judges, really. So I think US is an exception. You talk about that there has to be structural change. I completely agree with you, but we haven't really broached the subject or the topic. What kind of structural changes are we talking about? Are we talking about comprehensive land reform in the case of Pakistan, something approaching which happened in India at the time of independence or something thereabouts? And if Irfan can tell you more about that. But I think we haven't really talked about how to get to a situation where most people in Pakistan don't want to leave Pakistan, or we can improve the situation. I think I will proffer a solution here, and I think we haven't talked about improving the quality of the institution of democracy. I think that, in my opinion, has been the key missing variable in the case of Pakistan. For various reasons, democratic dispensations have been interrupted, for the lack of a better word. And I think once we get the institution of democracy going, we can hope to see pro-people policies. We can hope to have a system that offers more accountability. And even right now, with the current dispensation that you talk about, and I'm very glad to see that you have reposed so much confidence in the Prime Minister. But there are people in Pakistan who claim that this is a setup in which the veto player and the current political government are on the same page. So I think the jury is still out on how democratic, quote unquote, Pakistani system is. And I agree with your analysis, but I think the way forward is by strengthening the institution of democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akdas. And I might add, since nobody is using the word, but it is the role of the army that you're referring to. And in the past, when people in Pakistan have talked about sharing of power, it's not the three branches of government that Raza identified in the US. It was always the troika, and the strongest leg in that troika was always the army chief. That has not changed. I think that is the point that you're making. And so maybe Raza can address that issue.
Okay, so I think, again, we have to recognize that there are some people who are benefiting from the weaknesses in the structure of Pakistan at this time, right? And my belief is when you have a weak governance and weak leaders and corrupt leaders, the military becomes stronger. People of Pakistan have, I believe, still a lot more faith in the military than a lot of our leaders, because the leaders are more corrupt. And I'll give you the reason for why. So if you have an elected person, they're elected for a short term, 5 years, whatever is the term. That is the only time that they have the power to plunder. If you have a dictator for life, like Saddam Hussein was, he didn't have the big need to extract wealth from Pakistan from Iraq, because he knew that he's going to be the dictator as long as he's alive. All right. So to me, an elected person without checks is worse than a dictator, because a dictator at least is going to stay there and does not have a short-term period to loot the country. So under these circumstances, the military will become stronger. The other part I would say is that somehow people have this notion that if Pakistan continues to have a political process like India, all right, they didn't have martial law in times. Pakistan does. Had many, I guess, ins and outs of democratically elected versus the military rule. But I really don't see that for an individual, the life is a whole lot better for people living in India. Okay, I think the lifestyle and just the overall per capita income and poverty, both countries face similar challenges. So the thought that, okay, if you have a continuity of political system, somehow it results in something better, I don't see that from my analysis, because again, like I said, for an individual dealing with the police or how they live their life, India and Pakistan are really not that much different. So I think, again, we can say, oh, maybe late or let's wait, but I think we need to change the conversation. And we say that we need to understand why some of these other countries are successful. Why is it that the US does so well, right? And that should be the question, not that, we hate the US because, yes, they have the power, so they take advantage of that. Outside of the US, the government, here is not held as accountable as they're held within the US. So that's what I think the conversation has to change on how the government is subservient to the people, and there's servants of the people, not the rulers of the people.
Thank you, Raza. I think it's probably worth saying that to some extent, what is happening in the US and the system that you are talking about is not patented by the United States. I mean, this has emerged in other societies too.
Right.
And even the Prime Minister in Pakistan talks about the Riyasat-e-Madina, which is a concept of accountability and equality before the law. I think that should be recognized so that this shouldn't be seen by people in Pakistan or elsewhere as either you follow the US pattern or you don't, because these are universal values that people have. They want to be recognized and they want to have a voice. So let me see if Yasser can add something to the discussion. Yasser.
Sure, thank you. So I wanted to say that I do agree with, and I think it's really interesting, this idea of sort of preventing the concentration of power, as you've laid out, as a key facet of the way you want to structure sort of the political system, right? Now, one point I would say, so there are 2 points I want to make. One is that while I do certainly agree with you there, I think the issue that maybe Professor Afzal, for example, pointed out is that if we are talking about ending the concentration of power, if you're in a system where the greatest amount of power is concentrated in one institution, i.e. the military, then perhaps our first reforms should be towards breaking that concentration, right? So, because ultimately then even your politicians are primarily responsive to that one institution, right? That's what you have today in Pakistan. Your primary operation, how do I stay in power, is how do I please the military, right? So if you want to think about incentives to actually break the concentration of power in Pakistan, that has to be one of the key questions, if not question number one. However, I don't work on the military, I work on the judiciary. And I think it's really interesting what you talked about on the judiciary. And so, the ideas you pointed out towards sort of localizing the judiciary and bringing in some kind of accountability system regarding the judiciary, right? So, you mentioned the idea of judicial election. Now, I think the idea of judicial election is really interesting, but I think as Professor Afzal pointed out, the US is perhaps anomalous in having judicial elections, right? Elections for judges at a state level. And the reason is, I think that the problem is, what do we want judges to do? We often want judges to do very unpopular things, right? We want judges to do things that are about guaranteeing the law, even if that is not what the majority, the public want at the time. For example, say you are in a district with a regional religious majority, and the question comes about protecting religious minorities. Electing judges often undermines the incentive to protect minorities, which is one of the key functions you want judges to perform, because it's unpopular, right? Very often. So, but that doesn't mean that I think you're incorrect about I do think there's something to talk about. I'd like to know more of your thoughts on, are there other ways to think about the idea of holding judges accountable? How do you make sure judges can be held accountable if elections do not quite deliver the result you need them to do? Are there other ways to think about making judges responsive and accountable to the job that they've set out to do, which is protect the law, uphold the constitution, protect rights, and hold other branches to the law, right? How do we do that? How do we do that in a way that we can hold them accountable to that mission? If elections don't work, what other options do we have? That's my question.
Okay, good question.
Thank you.
So,
And Raza, if I can request you to keep your reply short, because I'd like to really have you wrap up some of your thinking. We only have a few minutes left. Thank you.
All right, so I'll just try to give you a short answer. The judges do not give a verdict in the US. The verdict is given by the jury. So judges are just managing that you're following the laws. That's all. That's all I have. So go ahead, please.
Thank you. Now, Raza, I think we've heard various streams of thought and questions from the group. I'm grateful for the reference that Murad has shared also to an article on corruption that he wrote for the newspaper in Pakistan. I hope people can take advantage of that. Maybe I can ask you now to explain a little bit of what you're trying to do in creating a coalition of support for your ideas around the globe.
Yeah, thanks everybody for this opportunity. So I have launched, and you can check out the website. Again, it's not perfect. We're working on it with the help of a full-time person hired and employed in Pakistan. The website is prosperityweb.org. It is a nonprofit organization registered here in the US. The goal for this organization is to connect people together, similar to Facebook, that people create small groups in different countries or different parts of the world to create the awareness that we need to talk about reducing and eliminating concentration of power. I mean, whatever mechanism we want to devise, okay, as long as one individual does not have the power to make a judgment or punish somebody without any checks from somebody else, that would be successful. Only thing I say is, why do we need to reinvent the wheel when the US has been doing it very successfully? So again, I would ask, please help me, and you're not helping, you're helping the cause, you're helping all of us, our children, their future, and join the movement. And let's stay connected to figure out how can we promote this. I'm trying to promote this through the media, but having a hard time, because I'm really nobody and people don't want to give attention to what I'm trying to accomplish. So that's the goal of this organization, prosperityweb.org.
Thank you, Raza. And let me contradict you. You are not a nobody. You are somebody. You have ideas, and you have shown your ability to transform enterprises. So on behalf of Irfan Nuruddin and the South Asia team, I want to thank you for giving us the time to break away from your trip to the United Kingdom. And I just want to keep an open invitation to everyone on this roundtable that you can continue this discussion directly or through us at the South Asia Center. My colleagues and I will be available to connect you and to take this forward. And of course, Raza, for you, Irfan Nuruddin and his team are available to take these ideas forward and to make them part of the Pakistan initiative as we go forward, because this is the mission of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council, to change the discussion of Pakistan away from one that is solely based on security considerations and regional hegemony and so on, and to make it more oriented towards the economy and development and the political and social development of the country itself, in which the diaspora can play a big role. So thank you all, and I will be seeing you again on another roundtable. Thank you.